Hello, and welcome to another episode of the discussion group. The ambition for this program is to have a thoughtful conversation on a variety of topics. We won't pretend to be experts on a given subject. Rather, we take the approach of being individuals who are naturally curious about the world and enjoy talking about things. Today's topic will be the Zen approach to life, where we'll explore its philosophy and practices on finding self-awareness, tranquility, and clarity in our lives. But before we delve into Zen, let me introduce the panelists. Mike, Bobby, Karen, welcome, and Tim, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. So I have a first clip which discusses what Zen is, but before we get into it, I'll sort of give my understanding of the definition of Zen. Zen is a form of Buddhism that developed in China in the 12th century, and it was taken to Japan later on, and it's basically a mindset of everyday living with awareness, with an emphasis on meditation. And we can talk about how it kind of derived from Buddhism with Siddhartha Gautama in the 6th century before the Common Era, I believe. But essentially, it's about living your life with a sense of awareness. And when we started to do these discussion group programs, I particularly wanted to get to this topic because I've read several books over the years on it, and I've really kind of taken to it to a point where, I've tried to incorporate it in my life a little bit, in the way I approach it, and the way I respond to other people, and it has been something for the positive.
Right.
So, we can take a look at this clip of what is Zen, but before I do, I open it up to the panelists. Any opening thoughts, comments on Zen?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about it kind of in my own terms of like how I've tried to use that in my own life at different times, like meditation and stuff. And it was interesting, and we'll probably get into it later, but just how like there might be some difference between how we view it here, versus how it kind of naturally came out of like China and Japan. So I guess that was very interesting to me, just at a high level, like thinking about it from my own perspective and maybe how I'm not practicing it all the time.
What I liked about some of the readings I've read over the years is they talk about Zen. You could be a very religious person and also be into Zen. You could be someone who doesn't necessarily believe in any religion per se, but you can still use Zen in your life to make yourself feel better, to reach out to people, to have compassion for people. So I think that's an interesting thing. The reason I think of that is my dad was very religious, but years ago, I was a kid, I found he had Buddhist books. I'm saying, this guy's supposed to be Catholic. What's going on here? And he was just always into trying to better himself, and he obviously read a lot about Zen. He read a lot about Buddhism. He read a lot about other things besides religion per se. And again, religion is one thing. Zen is not about religion necessarily. It's about other things.
Right, and there's a lot of people who are Catholic, Presbyterian, or what have you, and they practice sort of a Zen approach. In certain ways they meditate, they try to take on those attributes. So yeah, I understand that very well. So you could do a combination of things that give you a sense of spirituality.
Right.
No question.
But let's take a look at this first clip. This first clip has Daisen Roshi. He's a Buddhist teacher, and it also has Brad Warner. He's a Zen monk. And they both give their take on what is Zen. One of them is also a punk rock guitarist. I'll let you guess which one might be that.
Okay.
Let's take a look.
Simply, the word Zen, a Japanese word, comes from the word Chan, which is Chinese, which goes back to the word jhana, which is Indian, means meditation. So the Zen approach strongly emphasizes meditation. But more than that, Zen has come to mean what you find when you seriously and deeply meditate. When you come to practice Zen, you can find who you really are. You can find a source of happiness that nobody can give you, nobody can take away from you. It's independent of external conditions. This goes right back to the Buddha himself, who said nirvana is the highest happiness. Now, it's possible for even ordinary people like us to tap into this source of happiness and to find another level of meaning and value to life that's not around buying and selling, success and failure, and the world of the opposites. So as we grow, as we develop as human beings, we live in the world of the opposites, the world of me and you, the world of success and failure, the world of life and death. And this world is true, but it's a perspective. It's not the whole picture. Now, it's very easy to think of this as the one and only kind of reality because, for example, our language is structured in a very dualistic way, subject and object. Our thinking processes are dualistic, typically. But there's another kind of knowing, another kind of being that we can access, which isn't based in this world of subject and object. This other place, this other mode, if you like, we can call non-dual. It's very akin in some ways to what we already know of as intuition. There's another human function of knowing that can develop. Now, in this non-dual place, we actually have no problems. We can find a kind of an ease, a peace, a happiness. We can know that we're home, and actually we always were, and we always will be. We gain nothing and we lose nothing. Happiness is found here and now. We don't have to go anywhere else. It's getting to know who and how we are right now, right here, that all this opens up.
The word Zen is a Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese pronunciation of an Indian word that means meditation. So it indicates a form of Buddhism whose sole focus is meditation, without ritual, without all of these other things. Of course, Zen does have a certain degree of ritual and ceremony associated with it, but the focus or the main point of it is always the meditation practice, the Zazen practice. If I were to give all the reasons that you should try Zazen or should do Zen meditation, then we're getting out of what the whole point of the practice is, right there, right at the minute I start saying you should do Zen because it will help you get rid of your pimples and get a girlfriend and fight fires and protect the bears and save the peanuts or whatever, I don't know, whatever you're trying to do. It just gets into some kind of other realm. I do it because I tried it and I could see that it was good for me. It made me feel better. It made everything in my life kind of run just a little bit smoother. When I stopped doing it, I felt shittier than before, so I would keep going back and doing it some more. That's the reason I do it.
All right, so which one's the punk rock guitarist out of those two?
First guy.
First guy.
Definitely. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, it's the second guy. What are your thoughts here? Comments?
One of the interesting things that I find about Zen is this idea that you can't really know it from studying it or reading it. Yet, in order to know about it, you have to study and read it to be able to call it something. So that it's very fascinating to me how you have to learn about it, but then you kind of have to forget about it in order for it to work. So.
Yeah. You know, I know Zen has an emphasis on meditation, and I was thinking about that in sort of our day-to-day lives here in the United States. You don't see a lot of meditation unless you're at a studio where people come to do that. You know, I've tried meditating, and I guess what I'm trying to think is, are there not per se substitutes, but things that I do in my life that's sort of where I can empty out my mind. And one of them is I walk a nature trail. I go out to the point. And I feel like sometimes I pause and I stare at the ocean, and I kind of can get there where I'm just sort of at, and I don't know.
Not actually thinking about anything, but
Yeah.
there, right?
So it's not meditation, but in a way, it's picking up the same sort of thing that I think they're talking about. I mean, do you guys, like, I know you cycle.
Well, you're saying it's not meditation? Who's to say it's not
Right,
meditation?
I would agree with that.
I remember when I was a kid, I tell you about my dad, having books on Zen. And I started reading, I was like 14, 15 years old. I started reading it, and at the time I was running cross country. So I would go out for a run, 10-mile run, and I would get this runner's high. Because I read a book on, and I found that a lot of runners were into Zen. And that was part of my meditation at the time. I'd go out for this long run, all of a sudden I would be in that present moment, basically focused I was just gliding along. So it was just a focus on that. That was, to me, was meditation.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think there's certainly a level of it. It was mentioned in one of the readings you kind of had sent out was, in the West we say like, oh, you go nature walking or something, and that can be very equivalent, right?
Yeah.
But I agree. Like for someone who runs, I don't run all the time, but when I do, yeah, of course you get the same endorphin, like
Right.
I'm relaxed. But it's those moments when you're actually doing it, and you're able to just look and see, oh, the trees, right, are, so beautiful. The birds are calling, and you're just like, you don't have your music on, right? You might have brought your headphones, but you paused it, and you're just like, it's just your footfalls, and you're just in that moment.
Right.
You're right.
And I think there's something you're very aware of that, and I think that is meditation.
You're not thinking really about anything, but you're self-aware. You're living in the moment.
You could find a happy, like a very, like a bliss, I guess. Maybe not pure happiness,
Right.
But it's a moment of it,
Yeah.
And I would say it's even the same thing with music. I know you play guitar and you're in a band. Same thing, where you're focused on that moment. You're living in that moment. And if you're looking at when you're working someplace, it's like you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about the past, you're kind of driving to do something. So there's moments in your life, and that's why I think you need to train. You talk about training,
Right.
Zen training,
Yeah.
Yes.
practice. That's what it's about, because if you don't focus on
Yeah.
that, it's going to be difficult to really get, and it's good. It's good for you. That's what it's about.
You have to keep coming back to it.
Exactly.
And I know, probably, my neighbors probably wonder, what I try to every day in the morning go out on the deck, and I do sort of like stretches, and they talk about Tai Chi, I think, and
Yeah.
different things. I've taken some yoga classes, and beginner's yoga. I don't like, because I'm not very flexible. But I go out on the deck and I do this in the morning, and I go back inside to start my workday, and I feel so much better. I mean, I'm only out there 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but it's like enough
I know.
where I'm sort of, okay, you know what? I'm in a good place. And so, whether it's like cycling or nature walks, music. What about you, Bobby? Is there like a moment of something you do where you just feel like, okay, I'm in a good place?
I know, like sometimes at work, so I do heights and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
There's moments where like everybody knows what they're doing, so you don't really have to communicate it. You kind of get into that moment, and I like the views in the morning when I go up on the jobs and you can see things. But even as much as like when you come home and some people go to like take a nap, you don't always fall asleep. But when you come from it, you feel more refreshed because
Yeah.
your mind got time to clear, even if you just go sit in a dark room.
Yeah.
So I wonder like how many people kind of do Zen without even knowing what Zen is, like they said in the video.
Right.
It's easier to forget.
Are you up on scaffolding?
Yes,
Okay. So you get. I think I've seen pictures on.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that you've taken.
definitely
where
like
you're
a lot
just-
of clarity sometimes
just
when you're
those-
up there and you're just concentrating on yourself and whatever you're doing, you know what I mean? Your height, doing
Yeah.
the heights.
Sounds very nice, actually. Yeah, so I think there are ways we can sort of bring it into our lives, but I think we have to, like you were saying, we have to consciously think to do it, but then not be
Yeah.
consciously.
You know what's crazy too is I've practiced meditation before in my life where you just try and actually take the time to do it, right? And, okay, I'm going to spend 30 minutes or 10 minutes. Let's start there, right? And really just focus. And you can get into a state where, right? I think usually the method is you let the thoughts come through you and let them pass, right? So
Right.
it's not about engaging them per se, but you're not trying to stop them either. You're just letting them pass. And you can get to a good place there, but finding that time in, I guess, like in the United States, the way our society
go, go,
is
go.
Insanely difficult, and you have to find it like for yourself. And I think what's interesting too, if we just pivot here a little bit, is how workforces are focused on that too, right? They call it like, I think it's, they have their resilience, and then they have their like awareness training, or like, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
yes.
And that's the key word they always use.
That is a very
And
Zen word.
It's
Yeah.
because they have everybody working. You're all working. Go go go. Everything needs to be done, and
Yeah.
it's like corporate mandated Zen of like be mindful, take time to yourself and your family, and it's like wow.
And which is interesting because like 20 years ago, you would not have seen that in the corporate work world. You know that. So I feel like they're catching on like for the mental health and the overall health of us.
Yes.
But you read about, being aware, being in the moment. And I was reading something recently, and it talked about, I forget who wrote it, but he basically said, if you're depressed, you're thinking about the past. If you're anxious, you're thinking about the future. If you're at peace, you're thinking about the present.
Right.
And it's about that. Before we did the show, we went over some materials, and so we looked at several books. One of the books is by David Scott, which I really like. It's called Easy to Use Zen. Sounds very Western, like, yeah, all right, this
No, but
is.
it's helpful. It really is a good basic start.
Yeah, but there is a part I wanted to read that I just think it sounds so simple, but you kind of get it. And let me just read it. Zen is a form of Buddhism that gives essential importance to meditation, to personal experience. And where was the part that I wanted to talk about? Okay, so the Zen method is to demonstrate reality rather than trying to explain or describe it in words. Thus, ask a Zen master a question such as, what is the meaning to life? And to make it personal to you, he is liable to answer with another question. When asked by a monk, what is the meaning to Zen? One Zen master replied, have you had your breakfast? Yes, said the monk. Then wash your bowl. I get it, He's not being a smart aleck, he's just kind of like, you're overthinking it, And so he goes on in this book, and he said, for instance, there was one Zen layman who proclaimed, how miraculous, how wonderful, I draw water, I carry wood. He's just going about his day, and he realizes this is what living is. You're living in the moment, and it's fantastic. You're alive, you're breathing. It's a beautiful sky out today, and that's enough. And I feel like if you set that as your expectation in life and not put all those pressures on you, then you can live. You can't really, it's hard to define happiness, but you can live a tranquil life with a sense of clarity, a sense of well-being.
Well, I think it's also framing what you consider the challenges in your life, and I think that first video we watched, that first monk,
Yeah.
was kind of getting at that.
Right.
We have that duality, everything's for or against you, and reframing that in a Zen way to say it is, and I'm living, and this is what I have to. If it is a challenge, even if it is a challenge, I am going to get through this thing, because it's happening and it's
Right.
a process. Is a far different mentality that we, I think, as a society struggle with, just to kind of take a deep breath and understand what it is and really just work through it, I guess, which maybe not too Zen, but
Well,
it is what it is, I guess. What I'm saying.
Carl Jung said the only way out is through.
Yeah, exactly. So you just kind of just balance you kind of keep a good mentality instead of things being always for or against you.
Yeah.
Just you're here.
Almost like taking the now and accepting it instead of looking at the outside factors coming in.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and part of what we were talking about earlier as well, with the, you're trying to find time to meditate. When do you meditate? How can you do it? One thing I have found is in working, I do music, I teach music, I also do web development, graphic design. And I often find when I'm doing graphic design work, I get into the zone, I guess, as you could call it, as with any work that you're doing, whether it's something that you absolutely love doing or it's something that you have to do. Even if it's something you have to do, you can find your way in to that zone where all of a sudden just the simplicity of what you're doing can be really fulfilling and Zen-like. I've found, and that is, sometimes I feel like it could be I'm just trying to be optimistic.
Yeah.
I'm doing all these dishes, and this is a wonderful Zen moment, and so there is that optimism. Like maybe I'm just trying to frame it in a way where it seems enjoyable.
You
But I have
know-
found a way where it can be enjoyable.
You know, it is a bit challenging. You read about Zen and the suffering.
Yeah.
Suffering is part of life.
Right.
But then it talks about desire being one of the
Craving.
craving. And
Yeah.
so it's going to be a fine line between, we all have desires, but to get rid of your desire totally, it's difficult. So I think in this society, people tend to be driving, I want this, I want that car. So I think it takes a lot of practice and maturity and time to say, I don't need all this stuff. I don't need, as much as I'm desiring things, do I really need that?
Right.
Right.
Because there's people that suffer mainly because of these desires they have.
And you know, that's a nice segue into our next thing I want to talk about is finding happiness. And defining what happiness is probably the wrong way to say it, but where we can kind of discuss desires, craving, and how that leads us to sort of unhappiness. But let's take a look at this second clip. This is a clip by from a book by Thich Nhat Hanh, Pieces Every Step, and he talks about happiness. And this is just waking up where you have 24 more hours ahead of you. So, all right, let's take a look at the next clip.
Breathe. You are alive. Every morning when we wake up, we have 24 brand new hours to live. What a precious gift. We have the capacity to live in a way that these 24 hours will bring peace, joy, and happiness to ourselves and others. Peace is present right here and now, in ourselves and in everything we do and see. The question is whether or not we are in touch with it. We don't have to travel far away to enjoy the blue sky. We don't have to leave our city or even our neighborhood to enjoy the eyes of a beautiful child. Even the air we breathe can be a source of joy. We can smile, breathe, walk, and eat our meals in a way that allows us to be in touch with the abundance of happiness that is available. We are very good at preparing to live, but not very good at living. We know how to sacrifice 10 years for a diploma, and we are willing to work very hard to get a job, a car, a house, and so on. But we have difficulty remembering that we are alive in the present moment, the only moment there is for us to be alive. Every breath we take, every step we make can be filled with peace, joy, and serenity. We need only to be awake, alive in the present moment.
Okay. Thoughts? This segment I'd like to talk about happiness, and I'd like to go where we were talking about before, and that's why are so many people unhappy? Why? And I think it comes down to what you were kind of alluding to. It's the craving.
Craving, living in the future, living in the past. I remember there was a book years ago, it was by a psychiatrist, can't think of his name, but the book was called You Can Be Happy No Matter What. And my ex-wife was reading it at the time. Little did I know she was unhappy. But anyway, that's another story. So I read the book myself, and all he talked about was living in the present moment. So he looked at people who were millionaires, successful, happily married, whatever. And some of those people, obviously there's people like that who were not happy at all. And he talked about basically making the point where you could be in the, if you look on the outside, in the worst position that you can imagine. Some homeless person. That person could be happy in the present moment. You don't know.
Right.
So living in the moment, that was his secret, his opinion to being happy in life. So.
Yeah, I think that's fair too, because I think more anecdotally, coming from my own background, but right, things get ahead of you. You have a whole day ahead of you. It's like, okay, I'm going to wake up this morning, and you have to work and do the dishes, or pick up the kids, or and then I want to go to the gym, or I need to make dinner, right? And you have all this stuff, and you wake up at in the morning, and you think to yourself, that's a lot of stuff, and you're way ahead of yourself, like as Mike was saying, right?
And anxiety starts to.
So what I find myself doing is it's really about that presence of mind, where you have to tell yourself, all right, I'm just doing step number one. I'm here right now. And then sure enough, if you just keep that right, you'll get through your whole day.
Yeah.
But you'll be in that moment every time. And it's a lot easier to handle that than feel that overwhelm of everything you need to do. Like, I think you're going to have the overwhelm, but how do you get yourself to a place where you're able to, kind of walk through it a little bit more consciously?
Well, that's interesting because you look at stress in life. Why are some people always stressed out? Some people never seem to be stressed out. So there's got to be some secret to not having the stress of life, because stress is not a thing, it's just a perception. So is it because that person is living in the moment? They've trained to live in the moment, not thinking about what's due next week for your job or whatever. So it's an interesting concept to be able to focus, Zen, to be able to focus on the present, slow down, don't worry about what's going on over there a year from now or a month from now or minutes from now, not looking in the past. I think it's difficult to do for most people.
Right. And on like the other side of that, I think when I first heard the video, the first thing I thought of, how many times have you like talked to friends or even thought to yourself, people play the what if game with the past. What if I had done this? How would this have changed that?
True.
People live in that a lot more, I would say, than the present.
Right.
In some of the reading, I remember there was, don't let your feelings define who you are. Your
Yes.
feelings don't define you.
That's a huge thing that I think is so difficult for people to learn.
It
not
takes a
always
while.
Yeah.
I want to read something. One of the books that I read recently, and these guys have read parts of, is *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari. It's very good, but I thought this was kind of interesting on this subject. All right, here it is. So he writes, yet even when we experience pleasant things, we are never content. We either fear that pleasure might disappear, or we hope that it will intensify. And he goes on to say, if when the mind experiences something pleasant or unpleasant, it simply understands things as they are, then there is no suffering. Meditation techniques that train the mind to experience reality is as it is, without craving. A state of perfect contentment and serenity is known as nirvana, which I'm sure it's not just a band from Seattle, but and I thought this was interesting. Suffering arises from craving. The only way to be fully liberated from suffering is to be fully liberated from craving, and the only way to be liberated from craving is to train the mind to experience reality as it is. I think he's right, and then it's the Zen way. You have to rise above it. You have to see past that. You have to look deeper.
Yeah. See past what your perception, I think, is kind of Mike was kind of saying. It's easy to perceive. It's all perception, right? It's easy to perceive things a certain way, but then you have to kind of train your brain to perceive things differently.
Definitely. Yeah. A point to that. Back when Jeff and I used to work at as well as Mike, we worked at the same company together, and there was a point where they were kind of getting rid of everyone.
Yeah.
We've all moved on, gotten different jobs, and it's been actually quite wonderful. But originally, I was planning on staying at that job until I would retire, and it got me thinking differently about retirement. And also, throughout the years, I've lost people that have been close to me who were actually close to retirement. And I saw them work really hard towards retiring. They're saving their money, they're working extra so that they would be able to live comfortably. And it got me thinking, and out of that, I came up with this way of thinking about working where whenever I take time off, I don't think of it as I'm going to take a day off or I'm going to take a half day. I think of it as actually retiring. And I found it helpful because instead of striving towards this time when I'm in my 60s and maybe I won't be as able to move around as I am now, won't be able to hike Mount Washington anymore, or maybe I could. I think of the time that I take off as actually retiring. And I've shared this with some friends, and it's worked out for them as well, because it gets you in this mindset of that it's not desiring to retire. You're actually retiring for that point. And again, it might be that thing of being optimistic.
But I think that's part of the optimism is part of.
Right.
I think it's easy. I don't know where I land per se, because I think sometimes it is my foolish optimism, right? To like just put a spin on it that this is just is, you know, and we'll get through it kind of thing or whatever, right? Like
Right.
this is just as good kind of moment, right?
Exactly.
But I think that's maybe part of it. You know what I mean? Like maybe that's
Right.
too far, but it's like it's not optimism. It just
Right.
is
It's
a better
perception.
philosophy than thinking.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm always it's gonna work out. Like that's optimism, right?
Right.
That's,
Yeah, well, I
that's
always
different.
think of Indiana Jones when he's stuck in something, like, well, I'll think of something. That's how I approach a lot of things, honest to God. Because you worry yourself silly. I'm like, well, I'll think of something. And you do.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still
the
here.
solution presents itself.
You know, you can't, you know, you can't go through life doing that or you'll miss your whole life, you know?
Yeah, I
It's the
think
saying, life happens when you're busy making other plans.
John Lennon.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think back to the video too. It was like pointing out, you know, like it can be maybe a little over the top. Where it's like, right, life's a blessing, and it truly is like a gift. You know, love. You know, be thankful and grateful and outgoing towards people. But I do think that, like, you know, I think similarly, losing people close to you reminds you of that stuff, and it can be very helpful to. That can be a strange blessing, right? Where you suddenly learn, like, wow, actually, this is a very short period of time in life, right?
Yeah.
We're only here for so long. So wake up and enjoy that new 24 hours you're given and share that and be aware of what's going on
Yeah.
instead of worrying about the next thing.
You know, he got a little bit into the Sapiens book about expectations, and I thought this was kind of interesting. Have low expectations.
Yeah,
Right.
that's funny.
You know,
Yeah.
have low expectations because what research has found, if you have low expectations, and I'm not trying to be, you know, funny, like, oh, you're living in a god. No, I'm just saying if you live every day simply and, you know, I'm glad I'm alive and this and that, what they found is those people are happier and they actually tended to do more because the stress, the pressure wasn't there. Whereas if you put that load of, I've got to meet this expectation, this, you're leading yourself down a life of unhappiness. And I thought that was really interesting. And I know you and I have talked about this a little bit.
I think I read something recently where it said there's more unhappiness created in this world from people trying to be more happy.
It's true.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at outside forces to make them happy. Well, I have that car, I have that girl, I have this job.
Right.
And it's not, in most cases, that's not going to do it for you. Happiness has to be here.
Right.
I think in the modern time too, it gets harder and harder because so many people are trying to achieve these things, and you go on like a Facebook or an Instagram app and you see all these people every day. Someone's getting married or someone's buying a house, and you're comparing yourselves
Right.
to other people at all the times, which I think just makes it even
Right,
harder.
it does make it
Yeah,
more
and someone
difficult.
said, I think I remember, you know, I've talked to people before, right? Like that's everybody's best moment, right? On social
Right.
media is everybody's best moment. So you're comparing to an unrealistic situation as it
Yeah,
is.
everyone
Right.
has their real
So
life
it's
and their
always
social media
creating
life.
a sense of lacking, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I'm actually personally, I stopped using like Facebook, and
Yeah.
I moved away from a lot of like the social media stuff.
Do you feel
I
more
still
zen?
use it. Yeah, a little bit. I had to do it. I think I was one of those people, and I'm sure there's others that have no problem looking at it. So not throwing shade that way, but I just was feeling that catching up thing all the time. So I said, I'm going to remove this for, disable it for 6 months. And if I don't really need it, no one contacts me here, and I still have my life, I think I'll be okay. And it's been better. For me, it's been better because I don't have all that noise, but
Right.
the internet is noise anyway. So I think we live in a fast society. Everything's faster now. It's easier.
Everything at your
Even
fingertips.
more desire, easier, right?
Right, and then, social media, but also, commercials on television.
Yeah.
I mean, they just opened a casino down the road there. You look at the commercials, like, wow, look at these beautiful people at the casino. They're so happy you go there. That obviously is not the case. It's a smoke-filled den of iniquity. I mean, it's just,
I can't believe it was not like the commercial.
Somebody busted out the old suit from like 1980.
To speak to that, this is from Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote, opening the door, he said, "Never in human history have we had so many means of communication, television, radio, telephone, fax, email, the internet, yet we remain islands with little real communication between us. When we cannot communicate, we suffer, and we spill our suffering onto other people. We can find ways to open the doors of communication again." And I think that sort of speaks to that. There's no authentic conversations going on anymore, it seems. They seem far and few between.
It's like yelling at a wall, and then another person yells at a wall, you know? But they didn't actually talk about anything.
Right.
Communicate.
And it's funny because I can remember when in the 1980s, when I was a kid, 70s, I was a kid, I'm dating myself, there were 3 network television stations and maybe some UHF stations on the side. But the news was like, the world news came on between 6:30 and 7, and that was it. You know, they put all the world news and you were done. And you went on. And if you did, you went outside and played, you did whatever. But if you were watching the news, that was it. Now we have all these channels and all this need to fill 24 hours so that, you know, and it just, then you have to start filling it with things that are not real. It's sort of fear, paranoia, and I don't want to get political, but you just sort of, then you start skewing, and we're going to market towards this audience and this, and so it's a bunch of noise. And who was it that said, someone said that we are living in an age where we're drowning in information yet starving for knowledge.
Right.
And
I heard that one, yeah.
and it kind of comes back to, okay, we have to live everyday life lived with awareness, and bring it back down to a simple level. And I think if, like you were saying, if you try to get rid of some of those things that you feel are noise in your life, you will be in a better place.
Definitely.
I did want to read one passage, back to happiness. This is from Sapiens, and I thought it was pretty good. He says, people are liberated from suffering not when they experience this or that fleeting pleasure, but rather when they understand the impermanence of nature, of all their feelings, and stop craving them. When the pursuit stops, the mind becomes very relaxed, clear, and satisfied. You live in the present moment instead. He says, it's like a man standing for decades on the seashore, embracing certain good waves and trying to prevent them from disintegrating, while simultaneously pushing back the bad waves to prevent them from getting near him. Day in and day out, the man stands on the beach, driving himself crazy with this fruitless exercise. Eventually, he sits down on the sand and just allows the waves to come and go as they please. How peaceful. You know?
That's Zen right there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So let's go into the next segment and we'll watch a clip about it. So we talk about happiness, we talk about feeling Zen, but how do we deal with conflict and aggression? Because it's bound to happen in our lives no matter how much you try to stay calm and clear, and how to approach it. So I do have a clip. The first part of the clip talks about the brain and how it evolved, where aggression and conflict come from. And then the second part of the video has Pema Chodron, who is a Buddhist monk, and she talks about how we can sort of ride out the anger. So let's take a look at this one.
Like our other organs, the brain has evolved, increasing over millions of years in complexity and information content. Its structure reflects all the stages through which it has passed. The brain has evolved from the inside out. Deep inside is the oldest part, the so-called brain stem. It conducts many of the basic biological functions, including the rhythms of life, like heartbeat and respiration. The higher functions of the brain have evolved in 3 successive stages, according to a provocative insight by the American biologist Paul MacLean. You see, capping the brain stem is the so-called R complex, R for reptile. It's the seat of aggression, ritual, territoriality, and social hierarchies. It evolved some hundreds of millions of years ago in our reptilian ancestors. So deep inside our brain is something rather like the brain of a crocodile. Surrounding the R complex is the limbic system, or mammal brain. It evolved some tens of millions of years ago in ancestors who were mammals, all right, but not yet primates like monkeys or apes. It's a major source of our moods and emotions, our concern and care for the young. And then finally, on the outside of the brain, living in a kind of uneasy truce with the more primitive brains beneath, is the cerebral cortex, evolved millions of years ago in ancestors who were primates. Emotions and ritual behavior patterns are built very deeply into us. They're part of our humanity. But they're not characteristically human. Many other animals have feelings. What distinguishes our species is thought. The cerebral cortex is, in a way, a liberation. We need no longer be trapped in the genetically inherited behavior patterns of lizards and baboons, territoriality and aggression and dominance hierarchies. We are, each of us, largely responsible for what gets put into our brains, for what, as adults, we wind up caring for and knowing about. No longer at the mercy of the reptile brain, we can change ourselves. Think of the possibilities.
So what kind of world are we creating? It's worth asking yourself this question. And it's not a question, it's more the question is, what kind of world am I creating? What am I adding to? Am I adding to this deep, unconditional love for self and other that is so healing? Or am I adding to polarization and aggression and even violence? It's really worth asking ourselves this. And then the approach here is so tender and forgiving that if I find myself about to go off on somebody, or right in the middle of it, I say, "Ooh, I am screaming here." Or I just lost it completely and I'm already slammed the door and I'm standing out in the hall. I mean, wherever you are in the chain reaction of reactivity, you know, you can pause and just ask yourself, you know, look what I'm doing. And then instead of denigrating yourself, instead of me criticizing myself, instead of me shaming myself, instead of me wallowing in guilt for the next 17 years, at least, there's this very forgiving quality which is epitomized by the Shambhala meditation, which is just feel the rage. Feel the shame, feel the guilt, feel the remorse, feel the resentment, feel the heat, feel the fire, just as it is, just as it is, just as it is.
Okay. Being children. Thoughts? I read one of her books. I think it's called "Making Peace in Times of War," or "Practicing Peace in Times of War," and I felt this. I've used it in my life, and she says when you're angry or when you're just very upset, is someone said something to you, the initial trigger is to say something back. You know, we all feel it. And it kind of goes to what Carl was talking about. There's a neural pathway, and if you use a neural pathway so many times, that's where it's going to go. And if you take the hook and you go down there, and I'm gonna strike back. I'm gonna say something I'm gonna regret. I'm gonna say something mean. It almost never makes you feel better later. It maybe for an instant, and then you're sort of like, then it just has, you know, made the conflict, the aggression even worse, because now that person's angry and it just gets bigger and bigger. And so in her book she was talking about having the courage, and I thought that's a key word, and I have a printout of it, having the courage for patience, to wait. And it does take courage, because it's not easy. You're sort of putting yourself out there. I'm not going to fight back. I'm not going to say something. I'm not going to do something mean. And you just sort of deal with the pain of someone said something hurtful. And it was interesting because she says, you're not suppressing because you're absorbing it, but it sort of will dissipate on its own. You will absorb it and it goes. And then after a little while, you are at a better place. You have a clearer mind, and then you can sort of deal with the situation in something that doesn't escalate the anger. And so it's like having that courage to do it. And I'm not always perfect at it, but I have kind of used that in my life, and I feel like it has made an improvement. Thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think it's taking a step back, but also it goes back to, I remember years ago, like I'm an old man, I am.
Stop it.
I remember a guy said to me, I was dating a girl. I was a kid, I was like 16 years old. He looks at me and says, remember one thing, be kind. Be kind. Be kind to your girlfriend, be kind to your wife, be kind to your kids. And it always stuck with me. Because throughout life, whether you're at work, your spouse, girlfriend, whatever, if you're kind to people, it makes a big difference. So if you're having an argument with someone, if you're having back of your mind, be kind. Because there's times you can get very angry about someone saying something. A lot of it could be desire. You want to be right in this conversation. You want to be right about this argument. So again, the desire is probably causing more issues in the long run. And being kind can stop that from fueling to something bigger.
Yeah.
Definitely. What I find interesting too about what she was saying was this idea of feeling the anger, because a lot of times we want to not, that's wrong, I shouldn't be feeling angry at that person, and in a way that can also lead to the repression of that, and then the build-up and the resentment and things like that. So the idea of actually feeling if you're angry or hurt, to allow that feeling to be there, and then, as you were saying, it eventually will dissipate. I believe that's a lot healthier than if we're to try not to feel something that we're feeling.
Yeah, and I realize it's sometimes that hook is so hard, but you have to, and that's where maybe the meditation and practicing it comes in. You learn to pause.
Like come through you, and yeah, I think the challenge is a lot of time the hook is that we got into it a little earlier with that the emotion isn't who you are, the emotion isn't what you are, right? It's how you're feeling in a moment.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to interpret that reaction, right? Which I think that lady was getting into it. Forgot her name.
Emma Trojan?
Yeah. So she was kind of talking about the reaction, like cycle or whatever, like how it's like a domino effect.
Right.
And it's, you sit and I think we've all had our moments after where you think about, oh, so angry in that moment, gee whiz, like here I am now, I don't feel better, more clear. But being able to do that is another thing. And you said courage, I think that's it. It's a lot of work. That's probably the hardest thing I think about any of this. You know, when you really get down to it, it's easy to say, oh, state of mind, keeping my tasks oriented, making sure I have consciousness every moment, awareness every, mindfulness. Yeah. That's all a little like, that's part of the path. But this part where you have to kind of engage your emotions and compartmentalize them and understand them, let them happen, right? It's I think a very difficult and very challenging part of
Yeah, and I think at times that anger, it was something I read recently. It was some Zen book, but it talked about there are times where that anger, you need to release it, because I think he said if the conch shell is clogged, there are times you need to clean that out. Mm-hmm. But then you don't want to judge yourself afterwards, saying, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You just let it go. Granted, you shouldn't have blown up like that. You shouldn't have been that crazy that particular time, but it was time to do it. And then let it go. Forgive yourself.
Going back to how we talked about different people meditate, maybe that's how you release the conch shell. Like some people go cycling or running or meditate or go for the walk, and that might be the best way to take your time and release it.
That's true.
It's healthier, you're not escalating, and then you just have a situation of hate that just grows and so forth. I think it's very important that we all sort of learn to pause for a moment, especially now. I know this is a divisive time that we live in, but if we all pause and not take the hook and just sort of, listen to one another and just sort of be in the moment, it'll be helpful.
Yeah.
Well, we are almost out of time. I have one clip to close us out. I intentionally wanted this clip. Oh, thanks, buddy. This is, you're going to recognize him immediately. It's Mr. Rogers. And I think, I think he was a Presbyterian minister or something like that. I'll have to look that up.
He
But
was, yeah.
he had a really Zen approach. One of his quotes was that deep and simple is far more essential than shallow and complex. And I read that once, and I thought about that, and I was like, wow, that's really Zen. But it is. It's
I think
true.
It's telling that our society, so I see it a lot, maybe it's just my generation, I'm not sure, but Bob Ross and Mr. Rogers have been a little deified a little bit because of that approach they took with, we're all kind of in it together, I love you no matter what, and you can do this, right? That's very philosophically, I think, aligned to the
I like Bob
approach.
Ross too.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll just put him on while we're eating dinner.
Yeah.
Happy trees.
And it's very like, we're here right now, right? I'm building this painting, I'm doing this thing. I'm going to put a tree here.
There's
because
no
he's
mistakes.
conscious.
Yeah.
And he's aware of it, and you can do it too, right? That encouragement. And you said, Mr. Rogers is very similar. You're special, you're unique, but also, right? Like, let's think about what we're doing.
Right, and his message at the end was, it's such a good feeling to know you're alive. And that's it. That's very Zen. And so when I saw there's a lot of things about Mr. Rogers lately coming out in movies and documentaries.
I know.
And it is needed probably now more than ever. But I thought for today's program, I thought, you know what? That is Zen. It's going in the program.
Okay.
Excellent, good.
Let's take a look.
It's a good feeling when you're able to find people who like to play the kinds of things you like to play. That's one thing that helps to make friends, playing together. It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling, the feeling that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you, and you'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. You always make each day such a special day. You know how? By just your being you. Only one person in the whole world like you. That's you yourself. I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.
Hey, okay, there we go. So that'll be a nice little wrap up. Well, thank you everyone for being on the Zen program today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for
It was a
having
nice
us.
talk. So that is our program. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you join us next time when we hope our guest will be singer Rick Astley. Cheers.
Left, right, or up and down?
Up, down,
Left, down,
right.
just left, down.
Guys, we're trying to have a discussion about Zen. Can you put the tambourine down, please?
That was about music
Wait. No, Tim is talking about something. So you were saying, Tim.
Yeah, so like when you need to be mindful, it's good
Yeah.
to get, in that nice headspace, get some music going.
I should have wore a white jacket.
Well, then you really would have been like,
You never would have went on camera.
no one would have been able to see you. You're like, this Zen, and he'd be like, oh, it's a bright light talking over in the corner. Buddha's over there.
He achieves Zen throughout the programming.
Well, the thing about Zen, because I know.
Since I am a bright light.
Yeah, really, there you go.